Welcome to another episode of the i5 podcast. I'm Jonathan. I'm here with my co-host Jim.
Hello, and if you notice, I bought a new mic, so hopefully you will be able to hear me better.
Yep, now it's just my microphone letting down the team. I'm so ashamed.
Don't be.
Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that's more or less, actually, has it died down in the media, or are people still talking about it now?
I would say it has died down because, first of all, they found out exactly what happened. Second of all, they were investigating it for like 4 or 5 days, but it came out that the military knew what actually happened from like day 1 or day 2 or something like that.
Okay, so we thought we'd talk about it now and wait for all the information to come out, just because it involved 5 people actually dying. It is, of course, the Titan submarine that, well, went missing, but now we know it actually imploded. Just a brief little overview. There were 5 people on the actual sub. The Titan submarine itself was unregistered and very experimental. It was also unregulated. Said before, it imploded.
Basically,
Coast
it was
Guard.
a do-it-yourself project.
Yeah.
Millionaire who was over his head and decided he knew better than the laws of physics.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go into the technical analysis, I'll just give a brief naming of the victims who were on there, just because I want to make a little nuanced point. So the first was 77-year-old Paul-Henri Norjolet, known as Mr. Titanic. He was basically an expert on the Titanic and a deep-sea diver. Next was 58-year-old Hamish Harding, a British billionaire and a thrill seeker. The third was 48-year-old Shahzada Dawood, businessman from one of the wealthiest Pakistani families, another billionaire, and his son, Solomon Dawood, aged 19. And this was a treat that they were going on for Father's Day, like a bonding type of thing. And, of course, the person you've just mentioned, Jim, 61-year-old Stockton Rush, CEO of OceanGate, the company that developed this piece of crap submarine. And just as a side note, he actually charged $250,000 per person to go on this ride.
I mean, I'm pretty sure in Canada they have the suicide chambers. They don't charge that much.
That was the original price that was quoted for them to go on this. It's kind
Indeed,
of
it was.
just kind of a nuance point, just an insight as to how these billionaires live. I know people who can't afford to put their children on the school bus to school, and they can pop out $250K for a submarine ride to see the Titanic.
Yep. It's a different lifestyle, it's a different world, really.
I just want to make it very clear, though, that I am not saying these people deserve to die. This is a tragedy.
Well, yeah, it is a tragedy, but at the same time, natural selection and all. Like, the person who made this, he was getting various emails from various experts that, what you're building is dangerous. It will go, you will kill people. It will not make the trip. And he ignored them on. He actually bragged online that he ignored the safety regulations. And maybe he viewed himself as the modern Tony Stark. Like, yeah, I know better. I'm rebellious. I have money. You can't tell me what to do. And yeah, that didn't go too well.
Just to give some of the quotes that he actually has made, just because you made reference to them. So the first one that I have is, there hasn't been an inquiry in the commercial sub-industry in over 35 years. It's obscenely safe because they have all these regulations, but it also hasn't innovated or grown because they have all these regulations. That's Stockton Rush at the Smithsonian. That's his first one. The other one I got from the Unsung Science podcast. At some point, safety is just pure waste. I mean, if you just want to be safe, don't get out of bed, don't get in your car, don't do anything. At some point, you're going to take some risk. And it really is a risk-reward question. I think I can do this just as safely while breaking the rules.
Yeah. Like, he's right about risk management and the risk versus reward. But you also need to account the fact of what we call common sense.
Like,
Yeah, in this case, he decided it would be a great idea to build the submarine out of carbon fucking fiber.
Yep, and titanium.
No, the skeleton was titanium. The
Yep.
rest of it was carbon fiber, like the walls
Mhm.
and everything. So
Yep.
basically, as soon as he reached a certain depth, submarine, it just imploded because
He
that material. Oh, and by the way, that material he didn't buy brand new. He
Mm.
bought for whatever second hand, whatever left was from the company that was creating the Boeing airplanes.
He actually made a quote. I've actually got a quote from him on a CBS program. He actually said, "I think I've broken them with logic," referring to the rules. Good engineering behind me. There's carbon fiber and titanium. There's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did. End quote.
Ah, yeah, he clearly did, and now we know
Yeah.
why that rule was in place.
I mean, it reminds me. It reminded me of Ryanair when I saw the CBS actual documentary on him. When just before I say that, actually, there was a report a report made in 2018, which claimed that there were dangers to passengers due to the Titan itself from the Titan itself if it reached extreme depths. Sorry. So people actually warned him as soon as this thing hits extreme depths, it could kill people.
Of course they did, but
He didn't listen.
he had money.
Yeah. I think that's a really insightful point, though, you make when you say he saw himself as some kind of Tony Stark. Have you actually seen the footage of him?
I actually haven't seen the footage, no.
He really comes across as that. I'll put the footage in here to be edited out. Sorry, dude, I don't have it to hand.
I'd like to be remembered as an innovator. I think it was General MacArthur said, "You're remembered for the rules you break." And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium. There's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did. I'd like to be remembered as an innovator. I think it was General MacArthur said, "You're remembered for the rules you break." And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium. There's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think he really does come across as Tony Stark. I'll plop the footage in here of that CBS. Because what this journalist also discovered, Rush actually said to him it should be like an elevator in relation to a single button being on the actual submarine itself. He pressed it and it lit up. A lot of the parts were improvised. It looked jury-rigged as hell. I mean, one component, it was like a pipe thing, came from Camper World. The monitors were from off the shelf. And was it you were saying that there was a game controller for the steering wheel?
Yes.
Or the steering controls?
It was supposed to be a PlayStation controller, but for some reason they couldn't afford it, so they got a knockoff Logitech controller, and I don't know why.
They even cut
I'm not
corners
sure
on the
what-
cut corners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you spend 250k a ticket, it's quite a serious and expensive job, so I presume they had to cut corners, right? It's not like they had money or anything.
Previous deep-sea submersible. There was no dashboard, just a touchscreen computer and a single power button.
We only have one button. That's it.
Wait a minute, I've seen submersibles, and they are banks of controls, like cockpit after cockpit.
Exactly. This is to other submersibles what the iPhone was to the BlackBerry.
But many of its components seemed surprisingly cheap. For views outside the sub, he had installed store-bought security cameras. As for the ceiling lights,
I got these from Camper World.
and then there was the steering unit.
We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on! So, it seems like a lot of the way you made this is by taking off-the-shelf parts and sort of MacGyvering them together.
Yeah, pretty much.
Does that not raise anybody's eyebrows in the industry?
Oh yeah.
I know, you wouldn't think he was a billionaire himself.
Yeah,
Another
exactly.
thing...
And do you
another
know
thing-
how expensive the PS controller is now? It's quite
PS5?
expensive.
About £70,
Yeah.
I think, for a PS5 one, ain't it?
I know. If you cannot just spend 70 quid for a controller
I know.
nowadays, especially if you're dealing with a submarine and people's safety. Yeah.
It reminds me of the owner of Ryanair, the way he's talking about we can just cut, and save, like Ryanair who wants to bring down prices as much as possible. The guy's talked about not having toilets on the planes and all kinds. Sometimes you imagine him going as far as saying, we can sellotape people to wings to get them over.
Yeah, sounds about right.
One thing that also happened as well on the actual test dive, there's no GPS underwater, so they got around this. You wouldn't think that the U.S. Navy had an effective communication systems for their submarines. You wouldn't think that there was already an existing technological way of doing this in place. But he decided to cut corners and save money by simply having text messaging from the submarine to the surface ship in order
that's how sonar works, really. If you think about it to the very, very, very bottom, it's like a ping that says "I'm alive" message.
Oh yeah.
Like ping, ping. But rather than having anything remotely close to that, they said, rather than having someone scan us, we're going like, oh yeah, we're alive. Oh yeah, we're alive. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you're using what's a popular cell phone brand in America, I presume that was what happened in America. I'm pretty sure you would have coverage down there, like. I can't see why you wouldn't have coverage, am I right?
I mean, the relationship was that the submarine would receive directions like 400 degrees north type of thing from the surface ship, and the surface ship would guide them to the actual Titanic. But on the test dive in the actual CBS special, the submarine never made it to the Titanic because communications got cut.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, who would expect to be able to communicate with text messages and cell phone over that depth?
Question for you. Is this an example of why deep sea diving, submarines, and this kind of technology in relation to this should be just as regulated as aviation?
I mean, it is regulated.
Actually,
it's not illegal if you decide to create your own. Well, I guess aviation is more...
In terms of the safety, there's not that much regulation in terms of actual safety. You would never be allowed to get away with designing a plane with these kinds of flaws.
It depends if you plan of taking other people with you. I mean, in the same example, if that person decided to design a plane instead, as long as it doesn't go commercial, you cannot stop him from flying it, and you cannot stop other people who want to fly with him to fly with him. Yeah. It was another case like that where someone created DIY rocket who was a flat earther and wanted to prove that the Earth is flat. So basically, he propelled himself quite high up, but he built it himself, and eventually he died because, you know.
I mean, that's kind of what happened with this. You're right, there is regulation, but there wasn't anything to legally enforce it. Should it go commercial? Because this Titan sub did go commercial, and we took these passengers to their deaths. Do you think there should be more legal framework to force commercialized craft like this to have these regulations?
No. And the reason why no is because you can only account for stupidity so much. Like, you have all these regulations, you have all these experts telling you, no, it's dangerous, you'll die. Don't do that, it's dangerous, you'll die. And if you be like, no, I know better, and you decided to dive the 4,000 meters down the sea using a cardboard box, it's kind of your own fault, right? If shit goes wrong.
I think that, I mean, in principle, I can see where you're coming from. So basically, it doesn't matter what you make this person do. If they're determined to cut corners, and this guy had a raging hard-on for hating safety regulations. It's clear from all that. Basically, no matter what you force someone to do, someone like Stockton Rush would basically find a way of cutting corners somewhere else, no matter what you make them do.
I know, and it's actually an interesting discussion, because an interesting point that, in the sense that if you start accounting for stupidity for too much, with creating laws and regulations, you end up pretty much cutting freedoms, taking freedoms and rights away. Because if you decide if someone is not able to think for himself, for his own safety, then if you provide rules by dictating every single move that person does, then effectively you have him in some sort of prison.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That
No,
goes
no, absolutely.
like remember back in COVID where they had all the different regulations. In some other areas it was a lot more stricter, to the point where you actually had to send a text message to get to be allowed to go out at all. And you only were allowed out at all certain periods of time. So
Yeah.
you weren't allowed at night, and you had to get permission to go out for running, gym, or shopping, which you would have the reason in your pass that was texted to you in phone. And that regulation was because people weren't responsible enough and couldn't think for themselves to protect each
Yeah.
other. At least that was the official, reason. So if you start, my point is that if you start over regulating stuff to account for stupidity, because one or two people are extremely stupid to follow common sense, then yeah, that's not the way to go with it, because
There is a
you will stop a lot of, you will cut a lot of freedom.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. This reminds me of something similar with Blackwater security, just because in this instant, this guy, I mean, he was stupid with it, and he was doing it to save as much money as he could. It's just the fact that he went on this sub. This is one of those rare occasions where a company cut loads of corners, but the CEO who was responsible for it actually went down with the submarine and took the risk as well, even though I don't think this guy saw the risks, because he was, as you say, I think he was an idiot. But what you can have as well is someone like, say, Eric Prince, who's a very intelligent human being, who doesn't make him a nice guy, mind, who came up with Blackwater, which would eventually go on to be one of the biggest security companies. And he wanted to be immune from being sued by being attached to the military from the Rumsfeld Doctrine. Long story short, the military basically recommended he follow military guidelines. The US military doesn't really mess around with safety regulations. It absolutely enforces them because it has that immunity from being sued from deaths. Obviously because it's the military. And Prince wanted that for Blackwater, but every time he would get the regulations for operational deployment, he would start rewriting them to save money. So the big one was a tactical team in the Fallujah incident. Instead of 6 operators across 2 armored cars, he replaced the number 6. I keep on saying word because it was written in as a word. He replaced the number 6 with 4, and he removed the word armored. So it was just you have to have 4 operators in 2 cars instead of armored cars, and that saved him $1 million. And obviously what you had in Fallujah was, now the reason why you had 3 was 2 gunners and 1 driver. Both gunners could look at both sides of the car when you're going down the street. Getting to the point, you had that massacre in Fallujah where all of the security personnel were killed. The odds were against them because there was a Mujahideen intelligence operator who'd went over to Fallujah from Afghanistan to tell them there was a CIA team. They thought that the security team was a CIA team. Long story short, they had they had to deal with a lot of Fallujah resistance fighters who shot them and ripped the cars to pieces because they should have been armored and they weren't, and they didn't have the security personnel to cover all the angles. So they were turned into mincemeat. And I think as well they weren't allowed any heavy machine guns like a SAW 249. Bit of a wordful there, I know, but I think that's another example of even when stupidity is removed, you can give them this legislation and they'll still find ways to, amend it so they don't have to follow it, if that makes sense. They'll always look to cut corners.
I mean, yeah, this example you just mentioned, it wasn't much about stupidity. It was purely about profit.
Yeah, saving money.
I mean, it was about profit first, stupidity second.
Yeah.
But in this case, in the submarine case, it was stupidity first, money second. Because I'm pretty sure he had no problem spending more money to abide for these safety regulations. He just chose not to view himself as rebellious, know-it-all. And basically, I'm pretty sure he got confused with, he thought the amount of money he has equates to the amount of how smart he is.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's why I said this was such a unique case, because normally when people do things like this, The Eric Prince didn't go in those cars himself. This guy went into his own submarine. So this, the stupidity was like I said, I'm very taken aback that he genuinely does not believe in these safety regulations. I think the level of stupidity, how this man became a billionaire. Good God, why it's such a unique case.
I mean, that proves that you don't need to be smart to make money. But
I mean, the people going on must have heard these things. However, I actually won't go down that route because these people died, and you don't know what they knew and what they were told. So that's disrespectful to the dead. So I'll
it is,
probably
but
edit
does
that
make
out.
you wonder what sort of went into their heads thinking that this would be a good idea. Like,
You don't know what he told them. I mean, the thing is, they could have probably done their own research and found out about this. One thing, actually, the 19-year-old Solomon Dawood's aunt was saying that Solomon himself thought something was going to go wrong with this. Like, apparently he just had this really bad feeling before doing it.
yeah.
But as you were saying before, one thing I'd like to comment on as well, it was the media coverage. I mean, did you see some of the news articles, some of the news coverage? They literally had a ticker for how much oxygen was left, down to the second, and they had like the ticker, the timer going down on air. So it would be like submarine's oxygen left 5 hours, 4 hours. Really sensationalizing the story.
Yeah. Which is even worse because if you're trapped, although I believe that it's not the case that they were trapped on there. From what I read, it's the case that as soon as they reach certain depths,
Yeah.
a certain depth, it just imploded. So
I mean, we know that
time
now.
they didn't have the time to just stare at the countdown timer and be like, oh yeah.
As you were saying before, because the Coast Guard found pieces a certain distance away on the seabed from the Titanic, but as you say, the U.S. Navy heard they said an explosion, but we know it was an implosion. They heard the implosion.
Yeah, which was on day 1 or day 2. I can't remember. Sorry, it must have been day 1 because it imploded and it didn't take them more than a day to reach that depth. So yeah.
Oh yeah, and obviously the U.S. Navy kept that one classified.
They were told to do so, I believe, because they had other shit going on at the moment, so they needed a distraction.
Just looking as well. There was also some drama as well. I mean, it's always going to happen with a story like this. The first thing that came in my mind, the way the news was focusing on it completely, obviously it was distracting from other things, probably things unique to that country, so in the UK it was distracting from a few things the government had done. However, I do think it's bad form to conflate, even though I can see where the person's coming from, I do think it's bad form to conflate one tragedy with another, and it does leave you wide open to criticism of doing just that. I think I showed you the tweet of Ash Sarkar, where she said, "The Titanic submarine is a modern morality tale of what happens when you have too much money and the grotesque inequality of sympathy, attention and aid for those without it." I somewhat agree with that statement. The guy was absolutely reckless. I fully agree with that. I somewhat agree with that. The guy was reckless. It's this last part. Migrants are meant to die at sea. Billionaires aren't.
Yeah, no.
I wouldn't have said that part. I think the first part was okay. Do you?
Yeah, the first part was okay.
It's just that line, I wouldn't have said that. I would not have Don't get me wrong, I want to make it very clear. It's tragic what's happening to migrants dying at sea. I'm not laughing at that. We're not laughing at that on the channel. What I'm saying is, all you're gonna do is undermine your cause when you start comparing it to another tragedy and saying, mine's worse than yours. There was too much coverage of it, but just because you have an interest in this does not mean that you believe that migrants are meant to die at sea, which is what that kind of implies. Now, I saw card. Oh, sorry.
No. Yeah, I was agreeing. I wasn't going to say anything more because the whole discussion about migrants could be a whole new episode itself, analyzing how they affect the society and the economy and everything.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to make it clear, Sarkar did make it very clear what she actually meant, and it was pretty, it was pretty fair. I just wouldn't have had that line in the tweet. Obviously, Piers Morgan jumped on this, and Piers Morgan did the exact same thing, where he said, actually, the real morality tale from this is how horrifically non-compassionate you be kind woke mob can be. So a real lack of awareness there from Piers Morgan, because he himself is politicizing the tragedy, saying, look at the woke mob.
Yeah, I mean, I know that woke mob is involved always in shit, but in this case, I don't see how it's involved. Unless he is implying that Shaka is part of the woke mob. I don't know.
He is.
Either way, I fail to see the point.
It's
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I would say Talk TV is just as guilty of this, so they're in no position to call out Ash Sarkar. I think that's all I'm willing to devote to Talk TV for that one. Unless you have something else you want to say.
No. I think we
Did-
analyzed it pretty much as much as we could.
Did you want to talk about more about the economy and technology and economy?
The economy?
I just remember you saying that before.
Can't remember, honestly.
No worries.
But technology-wise, there's not much said apart from the fact that they decided to use carbon fiber for a vessel that will hold 5 people at 4,000, I think it was 4,000 kilometer depth. They also decided to use a knockoff PS5 controller to navigate and control the submarine. And the greatest thing of all is that they actually screwed the base for the screens in the walls of the submarine made by carbon fiber. So, yeah, that's the technology that was used.
It's like something out the Flintstones.
No, it's like something, you know how the Coyote and Roadrunner, the very old cartoon, where the Coyote was always building these DIY machines sponsored by Acme or Acne or whatever. And it was
Acme,
always
yeah.
like, barely holding it together and they would blow up to his face. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like that in a sense.
Oh, yeah.
Except that in this scenario, like, people actually died.
Which, again, was the tragedy of it all, really. Otherwise, it'd be like bad comedy.
Yeah.
Side-
I don't know what went through his head and what was his reasoning underneath it all. Unless it was purely just, fuck the rules, I'm awesome, I have money. Which it seems to be the case so far. But yeah.
Yep. I don't really have much else to say on it. Is there anything else you want to add?
Not really, apart from the fact that sometimes, even if you don't agree with them, it's worth actually at least, taking account as to why some regulations are there.
Yeah. And listen to countless experts who are telling you this isn't going to work.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about internet experts, I'm talking about actual experts.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah.
There were a lot of official scientific advisors who were telling him this submarine's not going to work, and he was very reluctant to even let them look at it.
Yeah. Well, I guess lessons learned.
Mhm.
Although, saying that, on the back of it, there's a new company now that is trying to organize trips to space. They built their own aircraft. The cost is 25k a ticket. But at least they're actually testing the aircraft with pilots, and they actually taking account safety regulations. And the other thing that I read is that this company that made the submarine, Ocean Gates, I think it's called, if I remember correctly.
Ocean Gate, yeah.
Yeah, they're planning more trips like that, and they're actually hiring for engineers. So yeah, business as usual, guys.
How can this not destroy the brand?
They have money? I don't know.
Either way, that's our take on the Titanic submarine disaster, and
It was
also
a
some of
Titanic disaster.
Yeah. Another one. It's weird because it's kind of a repeat of history, because all of this was said about the Titanic, like it was a great piece of technology, it's unsinkable, all of that, and then, taking the binoculars away from the crow's nest, it hit an iceberg.
Yeah.
Repeating itself, it seems. I don't have much else to say, do you?
No, not really.
Okay, with that, we'll call it. Unless there's something else, sure there's nothing else you want to add?
Yeah. I
Cool.
pretty much said everything I want to say.
Cool, so that was our take on the Titanic disaster, or the Titan submarine disaster, rather. Also our analysis into some of the drama that came out from it, those who tried to politicize it for their own ends, rather. And yeah, that's more or less what we have to say. We hope you found it insightful at least, and thank you for joining. If you agreed or disagreed, or if you've got something else you want to add about anything covered in the topic, don't hesitate to comment. Please hit the trinity of the like, share, and subscribe. and thank you for listening. Bye, guys.
Yeah. See you on the next one. Bye bye.